In this pod, we'll examine the different parts that make up a balance sheet.
A balance sheet shows you what a business owns and how it got those things. The same thing could be done for a person. For example, if someone owns a house that's worth £250,000, where did it come from? Was it that they saved up all that money and used it to buy the house? Did they get it from an inheritance? Or more likely, did they borrow the money? A balance sheet is often described as a snapshot because it's not measured over a period of time. It just shows what the business owns at that particular point.
There are a number of key terms here that you need to be familiar with. The first one is assets, which can be current or non-current. Current assets are things you own, but only short term. In business, this means less than a year. There are three main examples: cash, money owed to you, and stock. You also own other things such as property or vehicles, but these are things you own for a long period of time, maybe many years, so these are called non-current assets.
Then there's the money that you owe. Things you owe are called liabilities, which again can be short-term or long-term. A typical current liability, which means money you owe and will repay in less than a year, could be trade credit, where you buy stock and pay for it later. If you had a mortgage for your house, on the other hand, it will take many years to pay it back, so it would be classed as a non-current liability, meaning a long-term liability.
There's one other section of the balance sheet which shows how the business is financed. As we mentioned, this could be through things like mortgage, which is a long-term loan. But what if the business owner puts in their own money? This isn't money that's owed, so it's not a liability. Investments and funds from the owner are classed as capital employed.
To break this down further, capital means money, and employed means that it's been put into the business. So the owner's funds are a form of capital employed, money they've put into the business. Just like an employee works for the business, so does the money. It's there for business use.
Any individual or business can produce a balance sheet. Limited companies legally have to do a balance sheet at least once a year, but anyone can. For example, back to our individual who owns a house worth £250,000. Because it's something they own, it's an asset. And because they'll own it for longer than a year, it's a non-current asset. It's important to note here that some textbooks call these fixed assets.
The money for the house came from a mortgage, which is money owed. This would be a non-current liability of £250,000. Don't forget, a liability is something you're responsible for paying back by law. Try not to get confused here. Non-current just means long-term, not that it doesn't need paying back now. In the mortgage example, you pay a regular monthly payment which pays the mortgage off over time.
But what else might this person have? Possibly a car worth £5,000, which again would be a non-current asset. But instead of a loan, they use their personal savings to buy the car. This would be called personal savings or possibly owner's funds and put into capital employed. If they had some cash in the bank, this would also be an asset. So cash is used quickly, so it would be a current asset. If they've gone shopping but put it on a credit card, this would be money they owe, but in the short term, so it would be a current liability.
There are a few calculations that you need to know too, but they can be calculated differently, so check the way your exam board calculates them. The first is net current assets, which is simply current assets minus current liabilities. Then you have net assets, which is the total of your assets minus the total of your liabilities. The figure shows you the overall value of everything the business owns.
The final calculation is the financed by side of the sheet, which adds together all the money put into the business and gives you your total capital employed. The most important thing is that whatever the net assets of the business are, it must balance with the total capital employed. Whatever the business owns must have come from somewhere, so they have to balance.